Her boyfriend yelled, "You're dead when we get home." The Hell's Angel was eating at the next table. The evening sun painted long shadows across the worn linoleum floor of Joe's diner. Sarah Lawson sat across from her husband Tom in their usual corner booth, her fingers nervously twisting a paper napkin into tiny shreds. The familiar scent of coffee and grilled onions filled the air, but Sarah couldn't focus on anything except the knot growing in her stomach. "Look at you," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That blouse. Were you thinking wearing something that low-cut?" His eyes narrowed as he studied her outfit with obvious disapproval. Sarah tugged self-consciously at the neckline of her pale blue blouse. I thought it looked nice," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "Julie from work gave it to me." "Julie from work?" Tom mimicked, his lip curling. "Since when do you let other people pick out your clothes?" He stabbed at his meat loaf with his fork, the metal scraping against the ceramic plate. "You're my wife. You represent me when you go out in public. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Sarah's shoulders hunched forward as she made herself smaller in the booth. She stared down at her untouched chicken sandwich, her appetite long gone. The sunset streaming through the windows cast an orange glow across their table, but she felt no warmth from it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for anymore. These days, it seemed like everything she did was wrong in Tom's eyes. "Sorry isn't good enough," Tom continued, cutting his meat into precise squares. "First the blouse, then I catch you talking to that new guy in accounting. What's his name?" "Mike." His voice grew harder with each word. "I saw you laughing with him in the break room." "He was just being friendly," Sarah protested weakly. "We were talking about Dash." "I don't care what you were talking about," Tom interrupted, his knuckles whitening around his fork. "A married woman doesn't need to be friendly with other men. Period." The waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand. "Everything okay here? Can I get you folks anything else?" Tom's face transformed instantly into a pleasant mask. "We're fine, thank you." His smile didn't reach his eyes. As soon as the waitress walked away, Tom's expression darkened again. "You're embarrassing me, Sarah, making me look like a fool in front of everyone." His voice dropped even lower, taking on a dangerous edge that Sarah knew all too well. "Maybe like that, huh? Like making me look bad?" "No, Tom. Please." Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. She blinked rapidly, knowing that crying would only make things worse. "Shut up," he hissed, leaning closer across the table. "Just shut your mouth before you make things worse for yourself." A couple at a nearby table glanced over, then quickly looked away. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame, wishing she could disappear into the cracked vinyl of the booth. Tom's face had turned an ugly shade of red, a vein pulsing in his temple. Without warning, he slammed his fist down on the table. The water glasses jumped, ice cubes clinking, and Sarah's plate rattled against the surface. Several diners turned to stare, but no one said a word. Leaning forward until his face was inches from hers, Tom's words came out in a venomous whisper through clenched teeth. "You're dead when we get home." The bell above the diner's door jingled, and a rush of cool evening air swept through the restaurant. The steady thrum of a motorcycle engine faded into silence outside. Heavy boots crossed the threshold, each step deliberate and measured. Griff, the bear McAllister, ducked his head slightly as he entered. At 6'4", he'd learned long ago to watch for low door frames. His weathered leather vest bore the distinctive patches of the Hell's Angels, and intricate tattoos wound their way up his muscled forearms. The fluorescent lights gleamed off his graying beard and the silver rings on his fingers. The diner fell silent. Forks paused midway to mouths, and conversations died mid-sentence. An elderly couple near the door shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the husband's hand protectively covering his wife's. The teenage waitress behind the counter gripped her coffee pot tighter, her knuckles white. Griff ignored the stares. He was used to them by now. His dark eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail with the careful attention of someone who'd learned the hard way to always be aware of his surroundings. The bell-peppered chicken special written on the chalkboard. the flickering neon open sign in the window, the worn patches on the vinyl booths. And then he saw her. Sarah sat hunched in her corner booth, shoulders curved inward as if trying to disappear. Even from across the room, Griff could see the slight tremor in her hands as she methodically shredded a paper napkin. Her long brown hair fell forward, partially hiding her face, but when she glanced up briefly, their eyes met. In that fleeting moment, Griff saw everything he needed to know. The fear in those green eyes was familiar. He'd seen it too many times before. But there was something else there too, something that made him pause. A tiny spark of defiance, perhaps, of hope. The man sitting across from her, all squared shoulders and barely contained rage, was still talking in low, menacing tones. His suit jacket and carefully knotted tie couldn't hide what he was. Griff had known too many men like him. Without conscious thought, Griff found himself moving toward their booth. His size and presence seemed to part the air around him, creating a bubble of silence that followed in his wake. A few patrons watched with wary interest, while others suddenly became very interested in their meals. Sarah's husband was so focused on his intimidation that he didn't notice Griff's approach until the big man's shadow fell across their table. When he looked up, his face flickered between surprise, fear, and anger before settling into a mask of indignation. Griff didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension radiating from the booth. His hand, covered in faded tattoos and old scars, came to rest on Tom's shoulder. The touch wasn't threatening, but it carried the weight of unspoken warning. When Griff finally spoke, his voice was deep and steady, like distant thunder on a clear day. "You need to leave her alone, brother." Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat as she watched this unexpected intervention unfold. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone in the diner could hear it, and she found herself frozen in place, caught between terror and an inexplicable sense of possibility. Tom's chair screeched against the linoleum floor as he shot to his feet, the metal frame clattering to the ground behind him. His face flushed a dangerous shade of red, veins bulging at his temples. "Get your filthy hands off me," he snarled, slapping Griff's hand away from his shoulder. The diner fell into a heavy silence. The clink of silverware ceased. Even the sizzling from the kitchen seemed to quiet down. Every eye in the place was fixed on their corner of the restaurant. "Who do you think you are?" Tom's voice rose with each word. His perfectly pressed suit and carefully styled hair contrasted sharply with his twisted expression. "Some thug on a motorcycle thinks he can tell me how to treat my own wife." Griff didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood like an immovable mountain, his presence filling the space between Tom and Sarah. His eyes, dark and steady, never left Tom's face. The patches on his leather vest caught the evening light streaming through the windows, a reminder of a life that had taught him to stay calm in the face of threats. "You bikers think you're so tough," Tom continued, jabbing a finger toward Griff's chest but stopping just short of actually touching him. "Walking around like you own the place. Well, this is none of your business, you understand? This is between me and my wife." Sarah pressed herself further into the corner of the booth, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her wedding ring caught the light, a golden handcuff that had grown tighter with each passing year. She watched as other diners began to slowly edge away from the confrontation, some reaching for their phones. Griff's silence seemed to infuriate Tom even more. Each second of calm non-reaction made Tom's face grow redder, his movements more erratic. He ran his hands through his hair, messing up the careful styling. "You hear me, you piece of garbage?" Tom's voice cracked with rage. "Stay out of my business. And you," he turned to Sarah, pointing a trembling finger, "don't think this is over. We'll discuss this at home." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Griff shifted slightly, positioning himself more firmly between Tom and Sarah. He still hadn't said a word, but his message was clear. "You'll have to go through me first." Tom glanced around the diner, suddenly seeming to realize they had an audience. His jaw clenched and unclenched. "This isn't worth my time," he spat. He grabbed his suit jacket from the booth and stormed toward the exit, shouldering past a startled waitress. The bell above the door jangled violently as he slammed it behind him. The sound of his car, engine revving and tires squealing on pavement, filtered through the windows. Only when the noise had faded completely did the tension in the diner begin to dissolve. Conversations slowly resumed, though many patrons still cast concerned glances towards Sarah's booth. With the same calm deliberation he'd shown throughout the confrontation, Griff bent down to right Tom's overturned chair. Then, moving slowly as if approaching a frightened deer, he slid into the booth across from Sarah. His large frame somehow managed to make the movement gentle, non-threatening. The corners of his eyes crinkled as he offered her a reassuring smile, the kind of smile that transformed his whole face, softening the hard edges and years of weathering. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice barely carrying across the table. Sarah stared at her trembling hands in her lap, her fingers twisting the paper napkin into tiny shreds. The silence between her and Griff stretched out, filled only by the quiet murmur of other diners and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the parking lot in deep orange and purple shadows. The weight of Griff's presence across the table felt different from Tom's suffocating energy. Where Tom demanded attention and responses, Griff just sat there, patient and steady, like a lighthouse in a storm. His massive frame somehow made her feel protected rather than trapped. A waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand. "Can I get you folks anything?" she asked, her voice gentle with concern. Sarah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. The waitress gave her a sympathetic smile and moved on. Through the window, Sarah watched cars pass by on the highway, their headlights beginning to flicker on in the growing dusk. Each passing vehicle made her wonder if Tom would return, her heart jumping whenever a car slowed near the diner. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the slight tremors that ran through her body. Griff shifted in his seat, the vinyl booth creaking under his weight. The movement drew Sarah's attention to his hands resting on the table, big, weathered hands covered in faded tattoos, but held deliberately still, non-threatening. They were so different from Tom's manicured fingers that always seemed to be clenched in a fist these days. The jukebox in the corner clicked and whirred, starting a soft country song. The familiar melody washed over Sarah, reminding her of simpler times, before her life had become a minefield of Tom's moods and triggers. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music carry her away. When she opened them again, she found Griff watching her with quiet concern in his dark eyes. Despite his intimidating appearance, the leather vest, the tattoos, the graying beard, there was something gentle in his gaze that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Sarah glanced down at her watch, reality crashing back in. Tom would be home, waiting. The longer she stayed away, the worse it would be. The familiar fear crept back in her chest, squeezing her lungs. She looked up at Griff, studying his face for a long moment. Part of her wanted to tell him everything. About the years of walking on eggshells, about the carefully hidden bruises, about the way Tom had slowly isolated her from everyone she loved. But the words stayed locked behind her teeth, too dangerous to release. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'll be fine. I need to go home." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was a familiar flavor. She stood up, gathering her purse with shaking hands. Griff remained seated, watching her with those kind eyes that seemed to see too much. Sarah turned toward the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the diner's entrance, she paused. The bell above the door tinkled softly as she half-turned, catching one last glimpse of Griff still sitting in the booth. Her heart felt like it might burst with conflicting emotions, gratitude for his intervention, fear of Tom's reaction, and something else she couldn't quite name. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the cooling evening air. Sarah's key scraped in the lock, the sound echoing through the empty house. She pushed open the front door slowly, her heart pounding against her ribs. The house was dark and quiet, too quiet. Tom's car wasn't in the driveway, but that didn't mean anything. He could appear at any moment. She stood in the doorway, her hands still gripping the doorknob. The familiar scent of Tom's expensive cologne hung in the air, making her stomach twist. The house that had once seemed like a dream come true now felt like a beautifully decorated prison. Everything was perfect just the way Tom liked it. The strategically placed throw pillows on the couch, the carefully arranged flowers in their crystal vase, the spotless hardwood floors that she polished weekly. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The click of the latch made her jump. She moved through the living room, not bothering to turn on the lights. The fading sunset cast long shadows across the walls, transforming familiar objects into looming shapes. In the kitchen, she flicked on the light, wincing at the sudden brightness. The dishes from breakfast were still in the sink. She hadn't had time to wash them before Tom insisted they go to the diner. Another thing he would be angry about when he got home. Sarah's legs felt weak. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her purse dropping to the floor beside her. The events at the diner kept replaying in her mind. Tom's rage, the stranger, Griff's intervention, the look of kindness in his eyes. No one had stood up to Tom like that in years. Most people just looked away, pretending not to notice. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. 7:45 p.m. Tom usually came home from work at 6 o'clock. Where was he? Planning his revenge? The uncertainty made her hands shake as she pulled her phone from her purse. She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the keypad. The diner's number was easy to find online. She could call, ask if Griff was still there. Maybe he would help her. Maybe he would understand why she was so scared. But what did she really know about him? He was a Hell's Angel. She'd seen the patches on his vest. Could she trust someone like that? Tom's words echoed in her head. You can't trust anyone but me, Sarah. No one else really cares about you. The screen of her phone dimmed, then went dark. Sarah pressed the power button, bringing it back to life. The bright display illuminated her face in the darkening kitchen. It would be so easy to make the call, to reach out for help. Griff had seemed genuinely concerned, his quiet strength offering a sharp contrast to Tom's volatile anger. But what if she was wrong about him? What if this afternoon had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of kindness from a stranger? Maybe he'd already forgotten about her, moved on with his day. Maybe calling him would only make things worse. Sarah set the phone face down on the kitchen table. The weight of indecision pressed down on her shoulders as she stared at it, willing it to give her an answer. The clock continued its relentless ticking, marking each moment of her uncertainty. Finally, she pushed the phone away, leaving it untouched on the table. The morning rush at the diner kept Sarah moving from table to table, coffee pot in hand. Her new uniform still felt stiff, the apron strings tied a bit too tight around her waist. She'd started the job 2 weeks ago, but today everything felt different. The familiar faces of regular customers brought no comfort as memories of yesterday's confrontation played on repeat in her mind. Coffee refill, on? She asked an elderly man reading his newspaper. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too high, too nervous. The man nodded without looking up, and Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she poured, making the dark liquid ripple in the cup. Last night had been endless. Tom never came home. She'd sat up until 3 in the morning, jumping at every car that passed by their house, every creak of the old floorboards. When exhaustion finally won out, she'd curled up on the living room couch, too afraid to sleep in their bed. "Order up," Jerry, the cook, called out, ringing the small bell at the kitchen window. Sarah grabbed 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast, delivering them to a young couple in booth 6. The woman smiled at her, but Sarah could barely manage a polite nod in return. The diner looked different in the morning light. Sunbeams streamed through the large windows, catching dust motes in their golden glow. Yesterday, those same windows had framed the sunset as Tom threatened her, as a stranger named Griff had stood up for her. The corner booth where it happened sat empty now, like a silent witness to her shame. Sarah, Marie, the other waitress, touched her arm gently. "You okay? You've been standing here for a while." Sarah blinked, realizing she'd been staring at nothing, coffee pot still in hand. "Yes, sorry. Just tired. Rough night." Marie's kind eyes searched her face. Something like that, Sarah mumbled, moving away before Marie could ask more questions. The morning wore on. Sarah fell into the rhythm of her work. Take orders, deliver food, refill coffee, clear tables. The routine helped, but her nerves remained raw. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she tensed, expecting to see Tom's angry face or Griff's imposing figure. But it was always just another customer, another order to take. During her break, she sat at the counter, picking at a plate of fries she'd ordered but couldn't eat. Her phone lay face up beside her plate, silent. No messages from Tom. No missed calls. The uncertainty gnawed at her stomach worse than any threat could have. The afternoon shift dragged by slower than the morning. The diner emptied out after lunch, leaving Sarah too much time to think. She wiped down tables that were already clean, reorganized the sugar packets, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. Finally, her shift ended at 4 o'clock. Sarah hung up her apron in the back room, gathered her purse, and said goodbye to Marie and Jerry. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange as she pushed open the diner's door, the little bell chiming one last time. She'd taken only 3 steps into the parking lot when she saw it. Tom's silver Mercedes parked across the street, gleaming in the fading light. Her feet froze to the spot. Through the windshield, she could make out his silhouette in the driver's seat. He was waiting for her, just sitting there, watching. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Her palms grew slick with sweat as she stood rooted to the spot, caught between the safety of the diner behind her and the uncertainty ahead. Tom stepped out of his Mercedes, slamming the door hard enough to make Sarah flinch. The sound echoed through the nearly empty parking lot. He stalked toward her, his polished dress, shoes clicking against the pavement, his suit jacket fluttering in the evening breeze. "Get in the car, Sarah." His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the fury simmering beneath the surface. Now, Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, feeling small and exposed in her waitress uniform. The diner's neon sign buzzed behind her, casting alternating shadows of red and blue across Tom's face. His eyes looked darker than usual, cold and hard like stones. I said, "Get in the car." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Don't make a scene. You've embarrassed me enough already." Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Tom, you're hurting me. Hurting you." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You haven't seen anything yet. Wait until we get home. I'll show you what happens when you humiliate me in public." A car drove past, its headlights sweeping over them. Tom's grip loosened slightly as he glanced around, always conscious of appearances. Sarah used the moment to step back, putting some distance between them. "You think that biker's going to save you?" Tom sneered, his face twisting into an ugly mask. "Is that what this is about? You think some criminal on a motorcycle is going to be your knight in shining armor?" Sarah's hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides, trying to stand straight despite her fear. The evening air felt thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. Behind her, she could hear the clatter of dishes from inside the diner, the normal sounds of life continuing while her world teetered on the edge. "I'm not playing games anymore, Sarah." Tom stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouts. "You're my wife. You belong at home with me. And if you don't get in that car right now, I swear to God." The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, could feel the familiar urge to give in, to do what he wanted just to make the fear stop. But something was different now. Maybe it was seeing someone stand up to Tom yesterday, or maybe it was just that she'd finally reached her breaking point. Her voice came out barely above a whisper at first. "No. What did you say?" Tom's face reddened. Sarah swallowed hard, gathering every bit of courage she could find. Her voice grew stronger, steadier. "I said no, Tom." "You little dash." He raised his hand, and Sarah braced herself for the blow. But something had shifted inside her. Years of fear and pain crystallized into a single moment of clarity. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice clear and firm despite her trembling body. "I'm done, Tom. I'm not going back." The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Tom's raised hand faltered, his face registering shock before twisting back into rage. But Sarah had already turned away, walking toward the diner's entrance. Each step felt like moving through deep water, but she kept going, leaving him standing there, furious and powerless in the parking lot. Sarah stood in the doorway of her new apartment, cardboard box balanced against her hip. The space was small, just one bedroom with a tiny kitchen and living area, but sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the worn carpet beneath her feet. A few pieces of second-hand furniture she'd managed to buy filled the empty spaces: a faded blue couch, a wobbly coffee table, and a small dining set with 2 chairs. Her hand shook slightly as she set the box down. This was real. She'd actually done it. After years of living under Tom's control, she had her own place. The thought made her dizzy with a mixture of fear and excitement. She began unpacking her meager belongings, realizing how little she actually owned. Most of what she'd brought fit into 3 boxes, mainly clothes and a few personal items she'd managed to grab when Tom was at work. As she hung her waitress uniforms in the closet, she noticed how the hangers clicked against each other, making little musical sounds. No one would yell at her for making noise here. Sarah pulled out a small ceramic butterfly, a gift from her grandmother years ago. Tom had hated it, calling it tacky, but she'd kept it hidden in her drawer. Now she placed it proudly on the windowsill, where the sun caught its painted wings. She could decorate however she wanted. The thought brought an unexpected smile to her face. In the kitchen, she arranged her few dishes in the cupboards. The plates could go wherever she wanted them. The cups didn't need to be lined up perfectly. She could leave a spoon in the sink if she wanted to, and no one would scream at her for it. She found herself standing still, just looking around the space. The walls were a plain off-white, and there were water stains on the ceiling in one corner. The refrigerator hummed loudly, and she could hear the neighbors' muffled voices through the thin walls. But none of that mattered. This place was hers. As she unfolded a blanket her mother had made years ago, another item Tom had insisted they keep in storage, tears welled up in her eyes. She wrapped it around her shoulders, breathing in its familiar scent. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe freely. The afternoon light faded into evening, and Sarah finished putting away the last of her things. She ordered a pizza, something Tom never allowed, and ate it sitting cross-legged on her couch, not worried about making a mess or using the wrong plate. But as night settled in, the quiet began to feel heavy. Sarah sat on her couch, now cleared of pizza boxes, and looked around at her new home. The shadows seemed longer, the empty spaces more noticeable. The neighbor's TV droned faintly through the wall, reminding her of how alone she was. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The freedom she'd felt earlier was still there, but now it was tangled with a deep sense of loneliness. The apartment felt strange and unfamiliar in the dark. Every creak and settling sound made her jump slightly. Yet beneath the loneliness and fear, there was something else, a quiet strength she hadn't felt before. This space, however small and simple, was hers. No one could control her here. No one could hurt her. She might be alone, but she was free. Sarah sat in the darkness, letting these conflicting emotions wash over her. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking time in her new life, 1 second at a time. The morning sun filtered through Sarah's thin curtains, casting unfamiliar shadows on her bedroom wall. She blinked, taking a moment to remember where she was. The twin bed felt different from her old queen-size mattress, but there was something freeing about having all this space to herself. Her phone buzzed on the cardboard box she was using as a nightstand. Sarah reached for it, her hand trembling slightly. One new message. From Tom. "You're not safe. I'll find you." Her stomach clenched as she read the words. The familiar cold fear crept up her spine, and her breath caught in her throat. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The peaceful morning shattered like glass. Sarah forced herself to take deep breaths, just like her friend Jenny had taught her years ago. In through the nose, out through the mouth. She looked around her small bedroom, reminding herself that Tom wasn't here. He couldn't hurt her anymore, but his words echoed in her mind as she got ready for work. She jumped at every little noise, the neighbor's door closing, a car honking outside, the pipes groaning in the walls. Her hands shook as she tried to apply her mascara, making her mess up 3 times before she finally got it right. The walk to work felt like running a gauntlet. Every man who looked even remotely like Tom made her heart skip a beat. She clutched her purse closer to her body, checking over her shoulder every few steps. The 5-block journey seemed to stretch for miles. The diner's familiar bell chimed as she pushed open the door. The smell of coffee and bacon helped ground her, but she couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety in her stomach. She tied her apron with trembling fingers, trying to focus on the simple task. "Order up for table 6, called Marco from the kitchen. Sarah grabbed the plates, grateful for the distraction of work. She moved between tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups. But Tom's message kept flashing through her mind, making her hands unsteady. She nearly dropped a plate of eggs, catching it just in time. "Can I get some more coffee?" asked an elderly man at table 4. "Of course," Sarah replied, plastering on a smile that felt too tight on her face. She could do this. She just had to keep moving, keep working, keep pretending everything was normal. But the anxiety kept building, like a pressure cooker about to burst. Her chest felt tight, and the fluorescent lights seemed too bright. Every time the door opened, she flinched, expecting to see Tom's angry face. As she turned to serve another customer, something made her pause. There, at the counter, sat Griff. His presence was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, leather jacket, that quiet intensity about him. He was watching her with concerned eyes, and when their gazes met, he offered a small, understanding smile. Sarah felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. Something about Griff's steady presence made her feel less alone, less vulnerable. She didn't know him well, didn't even know if she could trust him, but in that moment, his simple gesture of support helped her breathe a little easier. Sarah wiped down her last table, her muscles aching from the long shift. The diner had quieted down, with only a few regulars nursing their coffee cups. The sun had already set, painting the sky outside in deep purples and blues. She glanced at the counter where Griff had been sitting all afternoon, surprised to see him still there. As she gathered her things from behind the counter, she heard his deep voice. "Rough day." Sarah looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. He'd shed his leather jacket, revealing muscled arms covered in intricate tattoos. Despite his intimidating appearance, his eyes were kind, reminding her of a gentle bear. "I've had better," she admitted, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her hand still trembled slightly from Tom's morning text. Griff nodded, understanding in his expression. "You did good, though. Kept going, stayed strong." Sarah felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. No one had told her she was strong in a very long time. "About the other night," she said, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "I wanted to thank you again. For stepping in with Tom, I mean. No need to thank me." Griff's voice was quiet but firm. "Some men—" He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Well, they need to learn respect." Sarah noticed how he kept his body language open, maintaining a careful distance that made her feel safe rather than crowded. It was so different from Tom's threatening presence. "I heard you found a new place," he said, changing the subject. "Getting settled in okay?" Sarah blinked, surprised he knew about her move. "It's small, but it's mine," she replied, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "Still need to get some furniture, though. Been using boxes as tables." She tried to laugh it off, but it came out somewhat strained. Griff straightened up, his expression serious. "Listen, Sarah, I know some people who could help with that. Good folks who donate furniture to women starting over." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And if you're worried about Tom, I can help with that too. Make sure he stays away." Sarah's chest tightened at the mention of Tom's name. The memory of his text message flashed through her mind. Part of her wanted to accept Griff's offer, wanted to feel safe, protected. But another part, the part that had learned to be wary of any man's help, held her back. That's very kind of you," she said softly, adjusting the strap of her purse. "But I should be okay. Really." The words fell hollow even as she spoke them. Griff nodded, not pushing the issue. "All right, but the offer stands if you change your mind." Throughout the rest of her closing duties, Sarah noticed how Griff remained at the counter, his presence steady and unobtrusive. When other customers came up to pay their bills, he subtly shifted his position, keeping them from getting too close to her. When a drunk man stumbled in looking for coffee, Griff's watchful gaze never left him until he shuffled back out. It should have made her uncomfortable being watched, but somehow it didn't. There was something different about the way Griff looked out for her. Not possessive like Tom, but protective in a way that left her feeling safer rather than smothered. Sarah hummed softly to herself as she climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, her arms full of groceries. The afternoon sun filtered through the stairwell windows, casting long shadows on the worn carpet. Her mind wandered to her shift tomorrow at the diner, mentally calculating her tips from the day. As she rounded the corner to her hallway, the plastic bags rustled against her hip. She stopped mid-step, her body going rigid. 20 feet away, her apartment door stood slightly open, a thin slice of darkness visible through the gap. The air seemed to thicken around her, making it hard to breathe. No, 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 she whispered, her fingers tightening around the grocery bags. She knew she'd locked the door this morning. She always checked it twice. The memory of Tom's text message from last week flashed through her mind. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The groceries suddenly felt like lead weights in her arms. She thought about running, about turning around and never coming back. But where would she go? This tiny apartment was all she had. Taking a shaky breath, she forced herself to move forward. Each step felt like walking through mud, her legs heavy with dread. The closer she got, the more details jumped out at her. The slight scuff marks near the base of the door, the way the lock looked slightly damaged. When she reached her door, she could smell it, Tom's cologne. The same scent that used to make her stomach knot with anxiety during their marriage. He'd been here, inside her safe space, her sanctuary. Sarah set her groceries down with trembling hands. The hallway felt too quiet, too still. She pushed the door open wider, wincing at the soft creak of the hinges. The apartment beyond was dark, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. Her hand fumbled along the wall, finding the light switch. The overhead light flickered on, revealing her small living room. Everything looked normal at first glance. Her second-hand couch still sat against the wall. The stack of books on her makeshift coffee table remained undisturbed. But there was something wrong about it all, like a photograph that's slightly out of focus. Sarah stepped inside, her shoes silent on the carpet. The air felt different, disturbed. She could sense that someone had been here, moving through her space, touching her things. The violation of it made her skin crawl. She moved through the apartment, checking each room with growing anxiety. The bathroom was untouched, its shabby shower curtain still hanging crooked. Her bedroom looked the same as she'd left it, bed made with military precision, a habit she developed during her marriage to Tom. Finally, she entered the kitchen. Everything seemed in place. The dishes in the drain rack, the old coffee maker on the counter, the calendar hanging on the fridge. Then her eyes landed on the kitchen counter. There, in the center of the worn formica surface, lay a piece of paper. Her hands shook as she picked it up, recognizing Tom's aggressive handwriting immediately. For words were scrawled across the page in thick black ink. "I'm coming for you." The note slipped from her fingers, floating to the floor like a dead leaf. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the tremors that ran through her body. The familiar fear she'd lived with for so long came rushing back, filling every corner of her tiny apartment with its suffocating presence. Sarah's hands trembled as she untied her apron at the end of her shift. The diner was nearly empty now, just a few regulars finishing their coffee as the evening settled in. The note from Tom had been haunting her all day, making her jump at every sudden noise and shadow. Through the front windows, she spotted Griff's motorcycle parked outside. He'd been coming by regularly, always sitting at the counter, ordering coffee, and keeping a watchful eye on things. Tonight, he was in his usual spot, his leather jacket draped over the back of his chair. As she gathered her things from the break room, her mind kept circling back to her violated apartment. The thought of returning there made her stomach twist into knots. She emerged from the back, her purse clutched tightly against her side. Griff looked up as she approached, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Rough day?" he asked, his deep voice gentle. Sarah glanced around the diner, making sure no one was within earshot. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Tom broke into my apartment yesterday." Griff's expression darkened, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "Did he hurt you?" "No, I wasn't home." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "He left a note. Said he's coming for me." Her voice cracked on the last words. Griff stood up slowly, his impressive height making him tower over her. But instead of feeling intimidated, Sarah felt protected. He placed a careful hand on her shoulder, the touch light and respectful. "Let me walk you home tonight." Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The thought of walking alone through the darkening streets was too much to bear. They stepped out into the cool evening air, the street lamps casting pools of yellow light on the sidewalk. Griff walked beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. For a while, they walked in comfortable silence. "You know," Griff said eventually, his voice rumbling in the quiet, "I've seen a lot of people like Tom in my time. Bullies who think they can control others through fear." Sarah glanced up at him, curious. "Is that why you stopped him that day in the diner?" Griff nodded, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "My sister." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She was with someone like Tom. Back then, I was young, running with the wrong crowd. Didn't know how to help her properly." They turned down a quieter street, their footsteps echoing off the buildings. "What happened?" Sarah asked softly. "She got away eventually, but it took years. Made me realize I needed to do better." He looked down at her. "Since then, I've tried to look out for people who need help. The angels taught me how to be strong, but I learned on my own how to use that strength to protect others." Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Here was someone who knew what it was like to feel helpless in the face of another's cruelty, who had found a way to turn that pain into something meaningful. They walked on through the evening, Griff sharing more stories about people he'd helped over the years. Each tale revealed another layer of the man beneath the intimidating exterior. Sarah found herself relaxing, her earlier fear giving way to a profound sense of peace. With each step, each story, she felt her trust in him growing stronger. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah wiped down the counter, stealing glances at Griff, who sat in his usual spot, nursing a cup of coffee. It was her break time, and over the past few weeks, these moments had become something she looked forward to. "So there I was." Griff continued his story, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, covered in motor oil from head to toe, and this little old lady just looks at me and says, "Young man, I believe you missed a spot." Sarah couldn't help but laugh, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd genuinely laughed that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. She untied her apron and slid onto the stool next to him. "I can just picture it," she said, shaking her head. "Did you ever get the stains out?" "Had to throw the whole shirt away." Griff chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But hey, at least her car started running again. Sarah reached for the coffee pot and refilled both their cups. The familiar aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, mixing with the scent of bacon from the kitchen. The regular breakfast crowd had thinned out, leaving just a comfortable hum of conversation from the few remaining customers. "You know," she said, warming her hands around her cup, "I don't think I've smiled this much in years." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flush. Griff's expression softened. "Life hasn't given you much to smile about, has it?" Sarah stirred her coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns. "No, I guess not. With Tom, everything was always so heavy, like walking on eggshells, never knowing what might set him off." "I get that," Griff said quietly. He turned his cup in his hands, his tattoos shifting with the movement. "Sometimes the hardest prison to escape is the one in your own mind." Sarah looked up at him, really looked at him. Beyond the tough exterior, past the leather and tattoos, she saw something familiar in his eyes, a shadow of pain that matched her own. "You've been there too, haven't you?" she asked softly. Griff nodded slowly. "Different circumstances, same darkness." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Back when I was younger, I was angry all the time. Felt like the world was against me, you know? Got into fights, made bad choices, hurt people who didn't deserve it. Sarah listened, sensing how much trust it took for him to share this. It took me years to realize I was carrying around pain that wasn't even mine anymore, he continued. Had to learn to let it go, to believe I deserved better than the anger I was holding on to. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift between them. A deeper understanding, a connection that went beyond their daily coffee chats. Here was someone who truly understood what it meant to be trapped, not just by circumstances, but by your own fears and doubts. How did you do it? She asked. How did you learn to let go? Griff's expression was gentle, his voice soft but steady. One day at a time. Started by believing I was worth more than my past. Sounds like you're doing the same thing right now. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but for once, they weren't tears of sadness or fear. She felt understood, truly understood, perhaps for the first time in her life. The evening crowd at the diner had thinned out, leaving only a handful of regulars nursing their coffee cups. Sarah moved between tables, refilling drinks and clearing plates, while soft country music played from the old jukebox in the corner. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, visible through the large windows. The bell above the door jangled violently. Sarah looked up, and her heart stopped. Tom stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage, his clothes disheveled. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto her immediately. Sarah! His voice boomed through the diner, making everyone jump. We need to talk. Now! Sarah's hands began to shake, and she nearly dropped the coffee pot she was holding. She set it down carefully on a nearby table, trying to steady herself. The familiar fear crept back in her chest, making it hard to breathe. I'm working, Tom, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. You need to leave. Tom stormed toward her, knocking a chair out of his way. It clattered to the floor with a loud crash. Working, he sneered. Is that what you call it? Prancing around here like some waitress, making eyes at that biker trash. The other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young couple near the door quietly slipped out, the bell jingling softly behind them. The cook poked his head out from the kitchen, concern etched on his face. You think you could just walk away from me? Tom's voice grew louder with each step. After everything I've done for you, everything I've put up with. He was close enough now that Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath. Please, Sarah said, taking a step back. Don't do this. Don't do what? Tom grabbed her arm roughly. Don't come get what's mine. Don't teach you a lesson about respect. His grip tightened. I'll kill anyone who gets in my way. You hear me? Anyone. The diner had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to have stopped playing, as if holding its breath. Sarah could feel everyone's eyes on them, but no one moved. No one spoke. Let her go. The deep, steady voice cut through the tension like a knife. Griff stood at the counter, his massive frame casting a shadow across the floor. Sarah hadn't even noticed him come in. Tom's lip curled into a snarl. Stay out of this, you piece of garbage. This is between me and my wife. Ex-wife? Griff corrected, taking a step forward. And she asked you to leave. Tom released Sarah's arm and turned to face Griff. His hand went to his jacket pocket, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw him pull out a switchblade. The blade snapped open with a sharp click that echoed in the silent diner. I told you what would happen if you got in my way, Tom growled, brandishing the knife. I meant it. Griff moved deliberately, positioning himself between Sarah and Tom. His face remained calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into loose fists at his sides. The other patrons sat frozen, watching the scene unfold before them. Tom's knife glinted in the fading sunlight, streaming through the windows, and the diner held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The knife trembled in Tom's hand as he faced Griff, the blade catching the dying sunlight. Sarah watched in horror as the two men squared off, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The other diners sat frozen, afraid to move or speak. Something inside Sarah snapped. Years of fear, of cowering, of making herself small, it all came crashing down in that moment. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Tom hurt anyone else because of her. Stop! Sarah's voice rang out, stronger and clearer than she'd ever heard it before. She stepped out from behind Griff's protective stance, her hands shaking but her spine straight. This is over. Tom's eyes widened, startled by her sudden outburst. He'd never heard her speak to him like this before. The knife in his hand wavered slightly. "Sarah," he growled, "get back." "No." She took another step forward, her fear transforming into anger. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. You don't get to threaten me or the people I care about." Her voice echoed through the silent diner. An elderly couple at a nearby booth watched with wide eyes. The cook stood in the kitchen doorway, a phone clutched in his hand, ready to call for help. "I spent years being afraid of you," Sarah continued, her voice trembling but determined. "Years letting you control every part of my life. But that's done now. I'm not your property, Tom. I never was." Tom's face reddened, the veins in his neck bulging. "You ungrateful little—" "I said it's over." Sarah's shout cut through his words. She could feel Griff tensing behind her, ready to step in if needed, but she kept her eyes locked on Tom. "Look at yourself, standing in a public place with a knife, threatening people. Is this who you really want to be?" The words seemed to hit Tom like a physical blow. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. He looked around the diner, seeming to finally notice all the witnesses to his behavior. The knife in his hand suddenly appeared to make him uncomfortable. "You need help, Tom," Sarah said, her voice quieter but no less firm. "But I can't help you. I won't. Not anymore." Tom's grip on the knife loosened slightly. His eyes darted between Sarah's face and Griff's imposing presence behind her. The rage that had been driving him began to crack, revealing something else underneath. Confusion, perhaps even fear. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the distant traffic outside. Sarah held her ground, though her legs felt like they might give out at any moment. Finally, Tom took a step back. His face twisted into a scowl, but the dangerous edge had disappeared from his expression. Without another word, he turned and stormed toward the door, shoving it open with such force that the bell nearly flew off its mount. As the door slammed shut behind him, Sarah's knees buckled. Griff caught her elbow, steadying her, and guided her to a nearby booth. The other diners slowly returned to their meals, throwing concerned glances in her direction. Sarah's whole body trembled as the adrenaline drained away. Her heart raced so fast she could barely catch her breath. She pressed her hands flat against the cool surface of the table, trying to ground herself in the moment, still barely believing what had just happened, what she had just done. She had finally stood up to Tom. After all these years, she had found her voice. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she sat on the examination table. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, no matter how tightly she clasped them together. The white walls and antiseptic smell made everything feel surreal, like she was floating outside her own body. Griff's large frame filled the plastic chair beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He hadn't left her side since the incident at the diner, not even when the paramedics insisted on checking her vital signs. The doctor had already come and gone, diagnosing her with acute anxiety and emotional shock. "You don't have to stay," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from earlier. "I'll be okay." Griff shifted in his chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. "I know I don't have to," he said softly. "I want to." Sarah looked down at her hands, noticing how small they seemed compared to his. A nurse had given her a paper cup of water, and she took small sips, trying to calm her racing heart. "I've never done anything like that before," she admitted. "Standing up to him, I mean. I always just took it." "You were incredibly brave," Griff said. His voice was gentle, completely at odds with his intimidating appearance. "What you did back there, that took real courage." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I was terrified," she confessed. "I still am. But when I saw him with that knife, threatening you and everyone else..." She trailed off, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Griff said. "It means doing what's right even when you're terrified." A comfortable silence fell between them. The hospital sounds filtered in from the hallway. Squeaking shoes, distant conversations, the soft beeping of medical equipment. Sarah felt exhaustion settling into her bones, the adrenaline finally wearing off completely. The doctor had recommended she stay overnight for observation, concerned about her elevated blood pressure and anxiety levels. They'd given her a mild sedative to help her rest. "What if he comes back?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "He won't get anywhere near you," Griff promised. "The police are looking for him, and I'll be right here." Sarah felt her eyelids growing heavy. The sedative was starting to take effect, making everything feel slightly fuzzy around the edges. She leaned back against the raised hospital bed, trying to fight the drowsiness. "You should rest," Griff said, noticing her struggle to stay awake. "I'm not going anywhere." Sarah wanted to protest, but she was too tired. As she drifted off, she felt Griff gently adjusting her blanket, his calloused hands surprisingly tender. The next morning, Sarah's eyes fluttered open to the soft morning light filtering through the hospital window. For a moment, she felt disoriented, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She turned her head and saw Griff exactly where he'd been the night before. His large frame somehow fitted into the small hospital chair. He was awake, watching her with concerned eyes. His leather jacket was draped over the chair back, and she could see he'd been there all night. The realization hit her like a wave. She felt safe. Truly safe, for the first time in what felt like forever. But with that safety came another feeling, a deep ache in her chest, as the full weight of her situation settled over her. Years of suppressed emotions, of living in constant fear, of making herself small, it all bubbled to the surface. The wounds Tom had left weren't just physical. They ran deep into her soul. And now, in this quiet hospital room with Griff's protective presence beside her, she could finally feel their full extent. The hospital room had become familiar over the past few days. Sarah watched sunlight dance across the white walls, creating patterns that shifted with the passing hours. Her physical strength was returning, but her emotions still felt raw and tender, like a healing wound. Griff arrived each morning like clockwork, usually bearing a paper cup of decent coffee from the cafe down the street. Today was no different. He walked in, his large frame making the hospital room seem smaller, and handed her the steaming cup. "You look better today," he said, settling into what she now thought of as his chair. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "The doctor says I can go home tomorrow." "That's good news." Griff's voice was gentle, patient. Sarah stared into her coffee, gathering her courage. These quiet moments with Griff had become precious to her, like islands of peace in her stormy life. "Can I tell you something?" "Anything." "I'm scared to go home," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just because of Tom, but I don't know how to live without being afraid anymore. It's like fear has become part of who I am." Griff leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Fear doesn't define you, Sarah. I've seen your strength." "Have you?" She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Because most days, I feel like I'm just pretending to be brave." "You stood up to him," Griff reminded her. "That wasn't pretending." Sarah set her coffee aside, twisting the hospital blanket between her fingers. "I keep thinking about that moment. I was terrified, but something in me just snapped. I couldn't let him hurt anyone else." "That's real courage," Griff said. "Protecting others even when you're scared." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, creating a soothing rhythm against the window. "You know what scares me most?" Sarah said finally. "That I'll never be normal again. That I'll always be the woman who let herself be abused for years." Griff's face softened with understanding. "You didn't let anything happen. He was the one who chose to hurt you." Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks. "Why did you stay?" "That first night, and every day since." "Because I saw something in you worth protecting," he answered simply. "Something strong and beautiful that he couldn't break." Sarah wiped her eyes, looking at this man who had become her guardian angel. His tough exterior couldn't hide his gentle heart. Not from her. "Not anymore. I need to tell you something," she said, her heart pounding. These past few days, having you here, it's meant everything to me. And I'm not just grateful anymore. I'm feeling something else, something that scares me in a different way. Griff stayed perfectly still, his eyes never leaving her face. I trust you, she continued, her voice growing stronger. Completely. And that's huge for me, because I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again. Sarah reached out and touched his hand, just briefly. Thank you for staying, for showing me that not all men are like Tom, for helping me remember who I am. The rain continued its gentle pattern against the window, filling the silence between them with its soft music. In that moment, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not gratitude, but something warmer, something that felt like hope. The detective sat across from Sarah in the hospital room, his notebook open on his lap. His expression was kind but professional as he delivered the news. We've arrested Tom Lawson, he said. Not just for the assault at the diner, but for several other crimes we uncovered during our investigation. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of her hospital bed. What kind of crimes? Money laundering, primarily. Looks like he's been involved in some illegal business dealings for years. The assault charges are just the tip of the iceberg. The words hit Sarah like waves, each one bringing a new revelation. All those late-night phone calls Tom had taken in his study, the mysterious business trips, the cash he'd hidden away in their bedroom closet. It all made sense now. He'll be in custody for a long time, the detective continued. You don't have to worry about him anymore. Relief flooded through her body, but it was quickly followed by a crushing wave of guilt. How had she not known? Had she been so focused on surviving his abuse that she'd missed the signs of his criminal activities? Thank you, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. After the detective left, Sarah gathered her belongings and checked out of the hospital. The drive back to her apartment was a blur of conflicting emotions. She should feel happy, shouldn't she? Tom was gone, locked away where he couldn't hurt her anymore. But instead, she felt numb, almost disconnected from reality. Her apartment felt different when she walked in, quieter, somehow. She dropped her bag by the door and sank into her favorite chair, the one that faced the window. Outside, life went on as usual. People walked their dogs, children rode their bikes, couples strolled hand in hand. Sarah closed her eyes, memories washing over her. The early days of her marriage, when Tom had been different, or at least when she thought he had been different. The gradual change in him, so slow she hadn't noticed at first. The way he'd isolated her from friends and family, piece by piece, until her world had shrunk to just him. Her phone buzzed, a text from Griff asking if she'd made it home okay. She smiled slightly, but didn't respond yet. She needed this moment alone, needed to process everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her living room floor. Sarah watched them creep along the carpet, thinking about time, how it could stretch endlessly during moments of fear, yet slip away so quickly during moments of peace. How many years had she lost to Tom? How many more would she have lost if she hadn't found the courage to leave? She stood up and walked to her small kitchen, making herself a cup of tea with hands that still shook slightly. The familiar routine helped ground her. The kettle whistled, the tea bag steeped, and she added just a touch of honey, small actions that were entirely her choice. No one to criticize how long she took, no one to complain about the brand of tea she chose. Back in her chair, Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Tom was in jail. The thought kept circling in her mind, like a bird looking for a place to land. He was in jail, and she was free. Free to rebuild her life. Free to make her own choices. Free to heal. But healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight line. It came with guilt, with doubts, with questions that might never have answers. The past didn't just disappear because the threat was gone. It lingered in her reflexes, in her fears, in a way she still sometimes caught herself looking over her shoulder. Sarah sat cross-legged on her living room floor, a cardboard box labeled Photos open beside her. Scattered around her were memories frozen in time, snapshots of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a wedding photo. She barely recognized the bright-eyed young woman in the white dress, smiling up at Tom like he held all the answers to her future. "Who are you?" she whispered to her younger self. The Sarah in the photograph looked so innocent, so full of hope. Her hair had been longer then, flowing past her shoulders in soft waves. Tom had insisted she cut it short a year into their marriage, claiming long hair was impractical. Another photo showed them at a company Christmas party. Tom's arm was wrapped around her waist, his smile perfect for the camera. No one would guess that just hours before, he'd berated her for talking too much to his coworkers. She remembered how she'd spent the rest of the evening pressed against his side, silent and small, trying to take up as little space as possible. The morning light streaming through her apartment windows caught the gold band she still wore on her left hand. Sarah twisted it off, studying the pale line it left behind. 5 years of marriage, contained in that single pale strip of skin. She dropped the ring into the box with a soft clink. More photos emerged, their first house, various holidays, family gatherings. In each one, she could now see what she'd missed before. How her smile grew progressively tighter, how she always seemed to be slightly turned toward Tom, as if anticipating his next move. The transformation was subtle but undeniable, like watching a flower slowly close its petals, one by one. She picked up a more recent photo, taken just 6 months ago at Tom's company picnic. The woman in this picture was almost unrecognizable from the bride. Her eyes were downcast, her posture defensive. She'd worn a high-neck blouse that day to hide the bruises on her collarbone. "I'm sorry," she whispered to that version of herself. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you sooner." The sound of knocking made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw Griff's familiar figure waiting patiently. She quickly wiped her eyes and opened the door. "Hey," he said softly, then noticed the photos spread across her floor. His expression shifted to one of concern. "Bad timing." Sarah shook her head, managing a weak smile. "Just going through some things." Griff stepped inside, carefully avoiding the scattered photographs as he made his way to her. He picked up the wedding photo she'd been looking at earlier, studying it with gentle eyes. "You know," he said, his voice low and steady, "the woman you're then, she did the best she could with what she knew. And the woman you are now, she's stronger than she realizes." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back fresh tears. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still her, that scared, helpless version of me. Like I'll never really be free of who I was." Griff set the photo down and turned to face her fully. "Those memories? That pain? You don't have to carry it anymore. It's okay to put it down, to walk away. The past is just that, past. You get to choose who you become now." His words settled over her like a warm blanket, and for the first time since seeing the photos, Sarah felt like she could breathe properly again. Sarah stood in line at the county clerk's office, her heart pounding against her ribs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of paper and cleaning supplies filled the air. Her hands clutched a manila envelope containing all the necessary documents for her name change. Each paper represented another step toward freedom. An elderly woman behind the counter called out, "Next." Sarah approached, trying to keep her hands from shaking. "I'd like to file for a legal name change," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. The clerk adjusted her glasses and began sorting through Sarah's paperwork. "Sarah Elizabeth Lawson," she confirmed, glancing up. "Yes, that's my current name." Sarah took a deep breath. "I want to change it to Sarah Elizabeth Bennett." She'd chosen her grandmother's maiden name, the strongest woman she'd ever known. The clerk nodded and began processing the forms. Sarah watched as the woman's fingers moved efficiently across the keyboard. Each keystroke felt like another brick falling from the walls Tom had built around her. "Sign here, here, and initial here," the clerk instructed, pointing to various spots on the forms. Sarah's pen moved deliberately across the paper, each signature feeling more certain than the last. 2 hours later, Sarah emerged from the courthouse with temporary documentation in hand. The official papers would arrive in a few weeks, but this was enough to start the process of changing everything else: her driver's license, social security card, bank accounts. She sat in her car, staring at the temporary ID. Sarah Elizabeth Bennett. The name felt right, like slipping into comfortable clothes after wearing something too tight for too long. She traced the letters with her finger, smiling at how official it looked, even on the temporary paper. Back at her apartment, Sarah gathered everything that still bore her married name. Her old driver's license, credit cards, even her voter registration card. They all went into a small pile on her kitchen table. She stared at them, these pieces of paper that had tied her to Tom for so long. Next came the box of photos. She'd already sorted through them once, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't just looking, she was letting go. One by one, she picked up the photos of her life with Tom. Their wedding day, holidays, family gatherings. Each image represented a moment when she believed things would get better, when she convinced herself that his anger was temporary, that his love would eventually overcome his cruelty. Sarah found an old metal trash can and took it out to her small patio. The evening air was cool, and the sky was turning purple with the setting sun. She dropped the photos into the can, then added her old IDs and cards on top. Her hands trembled slightly as she struck a match. The flame wavered for a moment before catching the corner of their wedding photo. She watched as the fire spread, curling the edges of the pictures, erasing Tom's face, their false smiles, the pretense of happiness. The flames grew higher, consuming every trace of Sarah Lawson. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was relief, pure, overwhelming relief. As the last pieces of her old life turned to ash, Sarah Bennett stood straighter, breathing deeply. The smoke carried away the final remnants of her past, leaving only possibility in its wake. The fire slowly died down, leaving nothing but ashes and the promise of tomorrow. Sarah watched until the last ember faded, then turned to go back inside. She had a new life to build. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Sarah and Griff walked through the park near her apartment. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, casting long shadows across the path. Sarah wrapped her light jacket tighter around herself, enjoying the peaceful moment. "You know," Griff said, his deep voice gentle, "I never thought I'd enjoy just walking and talking like this." He glanced at her with a small smile. "Most of my life's been about action, movement, always going somewhere." Sarah nodded, understanding. Over the past few weeks, they'd fallen into a comfortable routine. After her shifts at the diner, they'd spend time together, sometimes talking, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. "It's nice to slow down sometimes," she said. They reached a wooden bench overlooking a small pond. Ducks paddled lazily across the surface, creating gentle ripples in the water. Sarah sat down, and Griff joined her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "Tell me more about your childhood," Sarah said, turning to face him. She'd learned to read his expressions, the way his jaw would tighten when something bothered him, how his eyes softened when he talked about things that mattered. Griff ran a hand through his graying hair. "Not much to tell that I haven't already shared. Rough neighborhood, rougher people." He paused, looking out over the water. "But there were good moments, too. My grandma used to make these amazing chocolate chip cookies every Sunday." Sarah smiled, picturing a younger Griff sneaking cookies from his grandmother's kitchen. These little details, these glimpses into his past, had become precious to her. They made the intimidating exterior fade away, revealing the gentle soul beneath. "What about you?" he asked. "Any favorite memories from when you were little?" Sarah leaned back, thinking, "I used to climb this huge oak tree in our backyard. My mom would get so worried, but my dad would just laugh and say I had good balance." The memory warmed her heart. "I felt free up there, like nothing could touch me." Griff nodded, understanding in his eyes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Sarah realized how natural it felt to be with him, how safe. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered his steady presence and unwavering support. "Sarah," Griff said suddenly, his voice slightly rough. He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something." Her heart skipped a beat at his tone. "What is it?" "I've been trying to find the right way to say this." He took a deep breath, his hands clasped together. "I know your life's been complicated, and the last thing I want to do is make it more so. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is just friendship." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She watched his face, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear of rejection mixed with determination. "I've fallen in love with you," he said simply, honestly. "I think I started falling that first day in the diner when I saw how brave you were standing up to Tom. And every day since then, I've just fallen deeper." Sarah sat very still, her heart pounding. The words she'd been afraid to acknowledge, even to herself, were now out in the open. "You don't have to say anything," Griff continued quickly. "I just needed you to know, Dash. I love you too," Sarah interrupted softly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it." Griff shifted on the bench, his broad shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. The park had grown quieter, with only distant bird calls breaking the evening stillness. Sarah watched him carefully, noting how his hands tensed and relaxed as he gathered his thoughts. "I wasn't always like this," he began, his voice low and measured. "Before the Angels, I was just an angry kid from the wrong side of town. My old man split when I was 12, left my mom struggling to feed 3 kids." He paused, picking a loose thread on his leather jacket. "I started running with a rough crowd, getting into fights, trying to prove something to myself, I guess." Sarah reached out and touched his arm gently, encouraging him to continue. The gesture seemed to give him strength. "The Angels?" He shook his head, a sad smile playing at his lips. "They showed up one day at this bar where I was working as a bouncer. I was 19, full of rage, looking for somewhere to belong. They offered me what felt like family, structure, purpose." His eyes grew distant, remembering. "At first, it was amazing. I had brothers who'd die for me, who understood me. We rode together, lived together, fought together." A cool breeze rustled through the trees, making Sarah pull her jacket tighter. Griff noticed and automatically moved closer, providing warmth without thinking. "But things got complicated fast," he continued. "Some of the guys, they were into stuff I couldn't stomach. Hurting innocent people, dealing drugs to kids." His jaw clenched. "I tried to protect who I could without breaking rank, but it ate at me. Every night, I'd lie awake wondering if I was becoming the kind of man I always hated." Sarah listened intently, understanding the weight of his confession. She saw how his past haunted him, just as hers haunted her. "There was this one night," Griff said, his voice growing hoarse. "They wanted me to rough up this woman who'd been causing trouble for one of our dealers. She had 2 young kids." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't do it. Walked away right then and there. Cost me everything I had, but I couldn't live with myself if I'd done it." "You did the right thing," Sarah whispered, her hand finding his. "Maybe," he agreed quietly. "But leaving wasn't easy. The Angels, they don't take kindly to deserters. Spent 3 years looking over my shoulder, moving from town to town." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's why I understand fear, Sarah. I've lived with it too." Sarah noticed how his shoulders had relaxed slightly, as if sharing his story had lifted some of the burden. She understood that feeling, the relief of being truly seen and accepted. "After that, I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch someone get hurt again," he said, turning to look at her directly. "That's why I stepped in that day at the diner. Not because I was trying to be a hero, but because I couldn't be that scared 19-year-old kid anymore, watching bad things happen and doing nothing." They sat together in comfortable silence, their hands still intertwined. The setting sun cast long shadows across the park, but neither made a move to leave. In that moment, their shared pain created a bridge between them, stronger than words could express. Sarah leaned slightly against his shoulder, and Griff's thumb traced gentle circles on her hand, both finding comfort in the quiet understanding between them. Sarah's fingers trembled as she held the official court summons. The stark black letters stood out against the crisp white paper, announcing the date and time of Tom's trial. Detective Morris sat across from her at the small conference table in the police station, his kind eyes watching her reaction carefully. "We have a solid case," he explained, his voice steady and reassuring. "Multiple witnesses from the diner incident, documentation of prior abuse, and evidence of his other illegal activities. He's looking at significant prison time." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to still her shaking hands. Griff's solid presence beside her helped anchor her thoughts. He hadn't left her side since she'd received the call to come to the station. Will I have to testify?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Detective Morris leaned forward slightly. "Yes, but we'll make sure you're protected. Tom won't be able to get anywhere near you during the proceedings. And with the evidence we've gathered, your testimony will just be the final nail in the coffin." Sarah nodded, processing this information. A strange feeling bubbled up inside her. Not fear, as she'd expected, but something else. Something stronger. "I want to do it," she said, her voice growing firmer. "I want to look him in the eye and tell everyone what he did. Not just for me, but for anyone else he might hurt if he's allowed to walk free." Griff's hand found hers under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Pride radiated from him, warming her heart. Detective Morris smiled. "That's brave of you, Sarah. The DA will want to meet with you to prepare your testimony. We'll make sure you're ready." As they left the police station, Sarah paused on the steps, looking up at the clear blue sky. The weight of years of abuse seemed lighter somehow, as if the official documentation of Tom's crimes had already begun to lift the burden. "You okay?" Griff asked softly. "Yeah," she replied, surprising herself with how true it felt. "For the first time in years, I really am." Over the next few days, Sarah worked with the district attorney's office, reviewing her statement and preparing for her testimony. Each meeting made her stronger, more determined. The fear that had once paralyzed her transformed into resolve. The morning of her meeting with the DA's victim advocate, Sarah dressed carefully in a simple blue blouse and black pants. Her reflection in the mirror showed someone different from the frightened woman who had sat in that diner booth months ago. Her eyes were clear, her posture straight. The advocate, a woman named Janet, greeted her warmly. "We've received additional evidence," she explained, spreading documents across her desk. Bank records showing Tom's involvement in money laundering, testimonies from other victims who've come forward. "Sarah, your courage in speaking up has encouraged others to do the same." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the stack of papers. "All of this?" Janet nodded. "Tom's looking at 15 to 20 years, minimum. The prosecutor is confident. You won't have to live in fear anymore." The words washed over Sarah like a cleansing rain. 15 to 20 years. Freedom. Real, lasting freedom. She wouldn't have to look over her shoulder anymore, wouldn't have to flinch at sudden movements or loud voices. "When this is over," Janet continued, "you can start fresh. Complete witness protection if you want it, though given the length of his sentence, it might not be necessary. The choice will be yours." Sarah sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath. The choice would be hers. Everything would be hers now. Her life, her future, her decisions. The legal system, which had seemed so intimidating before, now felt like a shield, protecting her right to live without fear. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the park's green expanse. Sarah and Griff stood at its edge, their fingers intertwined. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old maple trees lining the path, carrying with it the sweet scent of nearby flowering bushes. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the setting sun caress her face. The past few months felt like a lifetime ago. The fear, the pain, the uncertainty all seemed to belong to another person entirely. Now, standing here with Griff's strong, steady presence beside her, she felt grounded in a way she'd never experienced before. "Remember the first time we met?" she asked softly, opening her eyes to look at him. Griff's weathered face softened with a smile. "That little diner. You looked so scared, but there was something in your eyes, a spark that told me you weren't broken." "I didn't feel very strong then," Sarah admitted, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the trees. "But you saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." The setting sun caught the silver in Griff's beard, making it shimmer. His large frame, once intimidating to her, now represented safety and comfort. He squeezed her hand gently. "You were always strong," he said, his deep voice full of conviction. "You just needed someone to remind you of it." A cool evening breeze swept through the park, causing Sarah to lean slightly closer to Griff's warmth. The playground in the distance was empty now, the swings moving gently in the wind. Something about their slow, peaceful motion spoke to her of possibilities, of futures yet to be written. I used to be afraid of everything, she reflected, watching the swings. The future seemed like this dark, scary thing waiting to swallow me whole. But now, she paused, trying to find the right words. Now, Griff prompted gently. Now it feels like an adventure, she finished, smiling up at him. Like there's so many paths we could take, and all of them lead somewhere good. Griff turned to face her fully, his eyes full of warmth and understanding. The setting sun behind him created a halo effect around his broad shoulders, and Sarah was struck by how different he looked from the intimidating figure who had walked into the diner that fateful day. She could see now the gentleness that had always been there, hidden beneath his tough exterior. "We've both come a long way," he said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Found things we weren't looking for." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. The park around them was growing quieter as evening approached, but the peace she felt had nothing to do with their surroundings. It came from within, from knowing who she was and what she wanted, from having someone beside her who understood both her strength and her vulnerability. Looking out at the horizon, where the sun was slowly sinking into a bed of purple clouds, Sarah felt a surge of joy and anticipation. The future stretched before them like an open road, full of promise and possibility. She turned to Griff, a peaceful smile spreading across her face. "This is just the beginning," she said, and together they stepped forward into a future filled with hope, healing, and love. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.